for our monthly Zoom call. I'm Christine Cottagio with Encore Palm Beach County, and I'm introducing our special guest. Jen Harrold is a seasoned HR executive. Some of you may remember her as our guest speaker at last year's Wisdom and Experience event, and she'll be sharing more information about that as we move through the interview. Jen, thank you so much for joining us. And Jen, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your personal journey.
Sure, Christine. Well, first of all, thank you to you and Rosemary and Encore for inviting me back. Looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. So regarding my background, I've spent probably around 2 decades in the human resource and human capital space, a large portion of that time with the ODP Corporation, and just various different roles, everything from recruiting to learning and development, to then a number of leadership roles in the human capital space. And then last year, from a personal journey standpoint, a big part of what I came into was sort of this awakening, almost 15 years with the same company. Do I want to now pursue the balance of my career another 10 to 15 years in the same organization, or do I want to break away and explore other companies, other opportunities, and look for growth in different ways? And so I did just that. There were also a lot of personal endeavors and personal reasons for me to pursue a change. And I knew jumping into a new opportunity, one from the next, just wasn't going to work for me. I do have 2 teenagers, one going off to college. I do spend a considerable amount of time also pursuing my kind of personal passions in the nonprofit space. With mentoring, and so really wanted to take some time to identify for me, from a personal brand standpoint, how did I want to spend my professional hours and time. And so took a number of months to focus on just that, and now recently have joined an organization. It was new for me, not an organization that I was familiar with, but through my network, learned more about them. And after meeting with a number of leaders, decided to join New Day USA, an organization now with their headquarters here in West Palm Beach. About 2 years ago, they moved to the Rosemary Square district. If any of you are familiar, there's been sort of this wave of Wall Street South that has been developing and growing here in the West Palm area. Mayor Keith has been a large part of that, along with a number of the business development board members. And their purpose and mission and overall the company really fit into my own personal brand and what I was wanting to pursue, which is a smaller organization, sort of that small to medium-sized business, with a passion for their mission and their own purpose. So New Day USA serves the veterans specifically with mortgage banking, financial products, and financial services. And simply, our purpose each and every day is to put veterans in homes. It is a for-profit business, and so that is also important to me, that we make balanced business decisions and that we keep in mind all of the sort of shareholder groups or stakeholder groups that we partner with. And ultimately, I think this sort of blending of passions of the veteran community with a role that I can bring forward, the HR knowledge and experience to the organization to help them continue to grow, really fit from a personal brand, professional brand standpoint. And happy to say, I think about 50 days in, if I'm counting correctly. So far, every day, I continue to kind of revalidate why I joined the organization. I should add that as part of the role of head of HR and communications, I also am leading up our efforts with the foundation. So the New Day Foundation, which is the charitable organization that the board leads, and that just truly aligns with kind of my heart's passion.
Wow, that's a big shift.
Very, very big shift from large Fortune 250 corporate, 20,000 employees to now under 1,000 employees and 3 offices and just more free enterprise and a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of ownership at the C-suite level, and very, very different and exciting all the same.
Well, much good luck to you there. Much good luck. You hit on a few good points that I think are very valuable for some of the people listening in making career moves. And so how did you transition from that career level position to your personal journey? What are some things that you had to do to adjust?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think how it unfolds for everyone might ultimately be different, though the mechanics, sort of the items that I think are crucial and important. One, it is knowing, or if you don't quite know, which I thought I did know what my story was and what my passions were and how I wanted to spend my life's work, because I thought I had been doing it for 15 years. And frankly, I had. But ultimately, my purpose had changed and what my goals were changing, and I needed to pause and really reframe that. So I think it's important to understand what is your story, and ultimately, how do you want to spend your time professionally? How do you derive happiness and purpose and that sense of success? Really defining that for yourself in very specific ways. What is the type of work that I want to do and own? What is the level of ownership and responsibility that I want to have? What is the kind of company? Is it a large enterprise? Is it a public company, a private company, a nonprofit organization? Really answering for yourself all of those things, or at least those were kind of the mechanics that I navigated first, before I even started to network, because networking with people to just let them know that I was open to the market and ideas and opportunities was great. But then I would spend my time talking to everyone and not spend my time talking to the ones that were aligned with the opportunities that I would truly want to pursue. So it was defining the personal brand first, followed by the networking. And it was really hard, especially with my personality and wanting to help people and wanting to make connections. That sort of is just always been natural to me. It was hard to acknowledge the network introduction or referral and still tuck them away politely, respectfully, and let them know that that was probably not an opportunity I would be interested in pursuing, but maybe if I could make a connection for them to someone else, I could. But not investing that 30 minutes in that networking conversation for myself. That was difficult at first, but it was important because I needed to spend the energy where I knew the opportunities would come that would work for me.
I think that's something really valuable that you shared, because I think most of the time, and you and I had this conversation earlier, people are just taking a job because they need a job.
Well,
and they
sure.
don't take that time in between to really understand what they want, what they bring to the table. You know, I remember years back when I was interviewing, I was always told, remember, you're interviewing too, you know. Yes. And I think a lot of times, especially in this climate, economic and demographic climate that we're in, people are just anxious to get a job, get a paycheck, and they don't really take that time to go introspective and understand what it is they actually need for themselves.
Sure. And I fully can appreciate that. I mean, it's a reality that many, and I would say probably most, are in a position where if they're not working, finding residual income is most important, and perhaps sometimes does trump the advice that I've shared. I recognize my situation is likely very different. That said, there are opportunities that in the interim, you can spend your time doing, whether it's consulting work or contracting opportunities. You know, the gig economy, which has quite frankly been around for quite some time, but has really exploded. And even in that consulting space, there's the opportunity, there are a number of expert sites that have popped up. A lot of private equity firms and others leverage these sites, like Alpha Sites or Mosaic Research Management. There are a number of these companies that have gig opportunities, and they are looking for expert level, very experienced individuals on a subject matter basis. And those too are opportunities that could fulfill the need to have the residual income, while the focus can also be spent in between time on pursuing what exactly is it that I want to do on a more full-time or regular basis. And, frankly, you might also, through those contract opportunities or expert stints, you may find a different passion or a different type of company, or uncover something new and different that you incorporate into your search going forward.
And I know that you and I had mentioned also about how significant volunteerism can be for exactly that. So how did you work that in?
Yes. So I'm of the mind that I think everyone should spend a certain number of hours volunteering. I'm glad that it's community service and programs like that are now institutionalized into high school programs and even college programs. So those are phenomenal to see. I think young people, especially today, are growing their interest in getting involved in the community. I try to be an example of that. Personally, for me, I have spent, I would say, considerable amounts of time in the education sector, and focusing on mentoring with individuals that happen to be in either social or family circumstances that they're born into, and they did not choose, and they need a mentor or some amount of guidance to help them navigate. And so over the last number of years, where I've aligned my time and that interest is with an organization in Palm Beach County called Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. They have a number of programs available to mothers and expecting mothers across Palm Beach County, and specifically the teen mentoring program. So these are teen moms that often need just a listening ear and some guidance and some help with navigating not only their personal circumstances, but the wealth of available resources that are available. They just need the connections. They need to thread through those things and understand how to leverage them to the fullest advantage. And so for me, that is where I have spent a considerable amount of time. And it's if you have teenagers, or if you've had them at some point, if you pause long enough, you realize you actually can learn a lot from them. I certainly have anyway, and I have children of my own. They are teenagers. The relationship, though, I have with my mentee is very different, as it should be. And she is a 17-year-old mother of a 2-year-old. And frankly, seeing her grow, kind of physically, emotionally, mentally, etc., and pursue her high school diploma, pursue next steps that, quite frankly, 2 years ago, she didn't even think were possible or available to her, and really see the perseverance, the confidence, and the growth in her. Certainly, for me, that's meaningful and it's fulfilling. But I would like to think that I've learned a whole lot more through this journey than she has.
Wow.
And that's what I then take into, kind of the work world. You have to remember that those around you, everyone around you, is going through something. And, the perspective is really what I tend to continue to incorporate into the professional space.
And that's why you're successful.
Well, that's a lot of hard work. Yeah.
So what advice would you offer to individuals that are looking to find meaningful opportunities, whether it be in volunteer or work, which were the tenets of what Encore is about?
Sure.
So what advice would you offer?
Yeah. With the volunteer work, I think I try to keep it pretty simple. Number one, align yourself with your passions and continue to remain as involved as possible. You never know who you're working alongside with, who you're volunteering alongside with, and what opportunities that may bring. Be open to every opportunity, every conversation. And it's pretty simple. What do you do? What is your name? What do you do for work? And start there. Make sure that those questions are included in those sort of light conversations. On the professional side, I think some of the advice I would offer is also pretty simple and basic, but maybe we don't think about these things. I think especially because of companies leveraging AI or artificial intelligence for their screening processes, and maybe not leveraging as many recruiters or talent acquisition specialists to truly review each resume. And frankly, I'm not sure cover letters are even read anymore, although I will still tell you, send one. Um, I think it comes down to things like, making the appropriate changes to things like job titles or job duties. A lot of times we tend to forget that a job title we hold in a company might be obscure. It might be very specific to the company that you're working for, or it might be so generic that it doesn't truly represent the role that you held. And I truly think that it's appropriate to make accurate modifications on the resume to things like the job titles and the duties, making sure you're including the buzzwords. And if you don't know what those might happen to be for your role or discipline, all it takes is look at a few job descriptions on Indeed or on Monster, on Google, and leverage that AI that we sort of just negatively refer to, to summarize and identify the top 10 buzzwords in these 5 job descriptions. And those summaries and buzzwords absolutely should be not just once in the resume, I would say 2 or 3 times in the resume. And then other things too, years. A lot of times we tend to include months and year. I think it's okay to just include the years, especially if you've had some purpose and some different changes that occurred, or frequent changes that occurred. I think just years are fine. I also think that, leaving off the details, especially on your education, and maybe I'm sure we'll get to this in terms of the age bias that's very prevalent in the workforce today. It's very tough to navigate that, and making sure that you're not allowing AI or even an individual to discount your application or your resume by making assumptions. I think also making sure that, if your education is included, that's great. Why include the year? I dropped the year of my own degrees from my resume as I started my networking and search in the last 6 months.
So how does someone navigate the tracking systems, the applicant tracking systems? How does that work?
Got to find the manager. And I run a recruiting team here. I ran recruiting teams prior in prior roles. And as much as we relied on postings and applications coming in, and I'd say even more so with the current company that I am a part of, the conversion rate of hires is significantly higher, like 8x higher for referrals and manager submissions. And so those come from networking, those come from current employees, those come from individuals reaching directly to managers to express interest in roles. And one might ask, well, how do I know who the hiring manager is? And I think navigating the networking really, when I ask someone, hey, what is your name? Okay, what do you do for work? Well, how long have you been there? Who else do you work with? And maybe that's natural to me because I'm in HR, and I would just say, try it and try it and try it again until it becomes natural for you. Make sure that when you meet someone, when you're at Habitat for Humanity helping build houses or at an Encore luncheon, when you meet someone new, walk away with 3 more names from that conversation and find out who those individuals are. Hey, could you introduce me to Jen Harrold over at New Day? I would love to have a conversation with her. I think we could, connect on XYZ topic. Really use those connections to introduce you. That's how you're going to get to know the hiring leader and get to the top of the list. Hiring leaders are too busy to interview 5 or 10 people, and when we do the job for them, they're happy.
Great advice. That's great advice. So as you touched on the fact about age bias in the workplace, now last year you did a fabulous presentation at the Wisdom and Experience event. And you spoke about the intergenerational workforce. And so how do some of the employers' policies and programs, how do they integrate older workers? How does that all come together?
Sure. What I see, and then I think what, from a candidate standpoint, what we can consider taking advantage of, it is tough for organizations to come up with strategies to address all of the various different components when we step back and we think about the generational gaps that are continuing to exist, when we step back and think about then the diversity goals that a company may have, particularly a public company that has stated goals coming down from their boards, et cetera. It can be very tough for a company to find balance across all of those dimensions. And what I tend to find are, and even what we have here, are a few different programs to address various different things from a strategic standpoint. When we want to make sure that we're balancing the workforce, we may seek to bring in experts. And so we may seek to bring in individuals, and oftentimes those are for a very specific need, a very specific purpose, and either consulting or contracting to our business. And even just in my short time with my company now, we've already done this, or approaching the second hire anyway, where we are bringing in very specific talent that are experts. And by expert, that means, if you were translating that, 30 plus years of experience in the industry with very specific knowledge. And in these 2 cases, it's 40 plus years of experience that these individuals are bringing in. And that insight and that experience, no one with only 5 or 10 years of experience, quite frankly, so the younger age generations, they're just not frankly going to have. And so finding those opportunities where companies are bringing in those experts, oftentimes it's not full-time. It is through a consulting opportunity. And so it's really thinking about and understanding, what are companies looking for and how are they bringing in that talent? And then how do I market myself to be just that and to fulfill, that profile for the company from a recruiting standpoint. And I think, what that looks like then is, again, through the networking, we have to ask ourselves a few tough questions. Do I want the big job? Do I want the big title? Do I want all of the responsibility? Or is there a specific aspect of that role, meaning that expert capability, that I want to focus on? And in these 2 examples, these 2 talents, one we've already brought on board and one coming later this summer, that was the conversation, and that was just it. They didn't want the big job. They really wanted to focus their efforts in a very specific way, and they wanted the flexibility. And so I'm finding that to be the case more and more.
So what would you suggest are some of the strategies that someone who is seeking a job would overcome to overcome those challenges and adversities? What kind of guidelines would you offer?
Sure. I think finding out if you're relevant. So is the resume profile, the LinkedIn profile, going back to some of those modifications that are appropriate, is that working for you? Is that material, that representation of what you can bring to an organization, is that working for you? And what I mean by that Is it showing companies that you have 30 plus, 40 plus, 50 plus years of experience and you can be all things to everyone? Then we might be missing the mark. So I would start first with, are you relevant? Are you doing what you need to do to appear relevant? And that might mean, and I just went through this, I had 3 versions of my resume. Now my LinkedIn profile, just one version. So I kept it very high level and not too specific. But the resume, on the other hand, that I developed, I had 3 very different versions. That does take work. It does take an investment of time. And even though I come from an HR background, I found it the hardest thing that I've ever done. Having to put my own resume together. And so I got feedback. I got feedback from people that you would be like, why? I mean, my sister-in-law, who is a stay-at-home mom, hey, look at this. I don't know, tell me what you think. And my husband, because he's my best friend. But beyond that, it was some peers that I've worked with in the past, a longstanding friend of mine who's a marketing executive. I got different perspectives and I got feedback. I wanted to know if my resume was relevant for what I was looking for. So I think you have to do the work up front there. And then while you're networking, making sure that you're having that conversation and you're sharing your personal brand, you're making sure that you remain relevant. And then, I think I shared it already, but at some point you really have to ask yourself, is it the big job that you want? Then make sure you focus on that. Is it perhaps time to look at consulting or contract, becoming a coach, which, Christine, I know you've done that. Is it owning your own business? What is it that you think you want to do next with your experience and qualifications? And again, it comes back down to being relevant, and sometimes being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right networking contact, for sure. And I'm sure there's a little luck and serendipity into it as well. But if a majority of your effort and energy and focus is submitting resumes through portals, through the ATS, and applying for jobs and waiting to hear back, sadly, I see that working less and less, and the contacts and the networking and the conversations working more and more.
And you mentioned earlier the personal brand.
Yes.
As you're working. And I think that's sometimes neglected. We kind of take for granted the community that we're involved in our workplace.
That's right.
Yeah, and you and I were discussing that earlier. I mean, that can be a saving grace if something does happen to your position, because there are people that already know you, know how to work with you, know what you bring to the table, and that's probably in the same industry. So that is, I think, part of the biggest things, even in the coaching world. That's something, you learn early on, is developing your personal brand. So, which I remember going back a number of years, nobody talked about your personal brand. You just worked a job. So, right. So I think that's a valuable piece of information that you shared. So from the employer's perspective, how do they support, or how can they support an aging workforce? You touched on some of them, but can you go a little bit more in depth?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, partnering with organizations such as Encore and the Business Development Board. There are other sort of government access opportunities as well. But I think organizations partnering in the local community and then for larger enterprise, finding opportunities to partner locally is critically important. So I'll give you sort of 2 perspectives. My prior company was large enterprise, multiple locations, over 1,000 locations. And so you can't imagine an organization developing deep relationships with the local entities in that many locations. And so we leveraged the associate resource groups. Those were groups that were very focused around a specific cause. There were more than a dozen of them in place. And one of those groups was more focused on, it wasn't necessarily age specific, but the individuals who were in this group identified with among themselves with individuals that were more in an aging workforce population. And so they really kind of from the bottom up raised all of the opportunities that we could have in place. And then essentially there's sort of a core group at corporate, and then they had the extension groups out in what we refer to as in the field, but out in all of our local market, not all, many of our local markets. And so these were programs such as mentor programs where we had our more experienced workers, sometimes experts, but sometimes truly just experienced, having a number of years with the organization or in general. Mentors meant being mentors to our new hires coming in. And by new hires, sometimes that meant this was a recent college grad who, raring to go and thought they knew everything. And there's a lot to work through and learn when you're starting in the corporate space. And sometimes these were mentors to others that were in very similar positions. So I think there are programs like that larger companies can pursue. I think in a company of my current company of this size, we can become more intimately involved in our local communities and with organizations, everything from speaking events to just posting positions and having access to the network, access to those opportunities. And I think, companies, in my opinion, there's a certain obligation that you have to giving back to your local community. And I know that's a big focus for New Day, where we do, in my role even, I spend a considerable amount of my time with community partners and understanding the ways in which we can give back locally and partner locally. So I think that's one of the top avenues that an organization can pursue. But it goes back to also what are the goals of the organization and how do they set out to make sure that their workforce is diverse across all of those dimensions. And I recognize, especially sitting in the roles that I have sat in, that that's a difficult challenge when you start to add it all up across all the dimensions.
Well, that's a lot. It's a lot.
I feel like I'm getting very academic there for a minute. Thinking about our diversity goals.
Sometimes it's hard when you haven't been in the corporate realm to understand the depth of what actually transpires in decision making and hiring and things like that. So when you speak about it, you realize that it's quite involved. So yes, your resume might be sitting on a pile of 1,000.
Unfortunately, that's the case. I mean, I have truly seen instances where we've posted positions and within days, hundreds of applicants have come in. And, imagining a recruiter that might have 20 different roles that they're supporting with maybe 10 or 15 different hiring managers. And if at least half of those have 200, 300, 400 applicants, sadly, but the truth is they're not looking at every single resume. And that is where the introduction of AI has certainly helped. And also, at the end of the day, if they're going just in, you have some recruiters that truly just go in order. The very first resume, they'll start looking at that. And when they get to a few that start to look good, they stop. But that's a few within that first maybe 50. And maybe you were 51 or 101, whatever that cutoff might have been. And ultimately, that's where the networking really does play a significant role, I would say, especially in today's job market.
And so how would you identify, if you could, an experience, something that helped you and guided you through that transition, some personal experience or person or something that really influenced your decision in your career transition?
Sure. So there's two, I would say, and this might entirely surprise everyone. So one individual that throughout my life has always been a force of influence from the early days, my grandfather. But the specific kind of inflection point and the realization of needing a change was prompted by my daughter. So for me, they were both very personal. So my grandfather was in the air. Well, he grew up on a working farm and ultimately was a farmer for many, many years in North Carolina, tobacco and corn. But he was in the Air Force. And when he got out of the Air Force and came back home, he was an engineer on the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Eastern North Carolina, and he was a farmer. And he was, so many other things. He was a secretary at church. He wore many hats. I was raised by my grandparents. And I mean, I can even remember he would sit at the kitchen table and balance his checkbook to the penny on Sunday. And if it was wrong, he was calling the bank or showing up on Monday. Like, just he taught me a lot without ever lecturing. I don't remember ever getting a lot of words out of that. So still a lot of observation that I learned from him. That my grandmother did most of the talking. So he sort of has always been in the background, even to this day, and he passed about 14 years ago. But my daughter was truly the force that last year, and it was just a number of different conversations with her, becoming a teenager at 13 and going off into 8th grade, and we took a trip together with some other moms and some kids, a long trip, 2 weeks, and it was conversations we had on that trip that really stopped me dead in my tracks. I was doing a much better job at work than I was at being a mom, and if you ask me, I think being a mom is the most important job. And so I had to reprioritize. And that's what led me down that kind of personal journey of, okay, well, what is that personal brand? How do I want to be known by everyone, not just my boss and the people that count on me at work? And then how do I reinvent myself to make that happen, basically? So those were sort of the two influences for me that have significantly influenced me both personally, but also professionally. But I think in terms of shaping my perspective and making transitions, going through my career, even for many years at ODP, I have a leader in mind that early on in my career, Maggie Prado is her name, but she was one of the first more senior leaders that I was exposed to. And that was only a few years out of college. And I just remember her investing in me and believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, and things would constantly change, or she would give me new responsibilities and new roles. And I think just being ready for that change, even if I didn't know what was around the corner, those were the kinds of experiences that really shaped me early on to remind me that that's important. And that has stayed with me to this day, being ready for just about anything. You may not always know what to do, but you got to just pause, take a deep breath, and start asking questions and ask smart people some smart questions. Those were the kinds of things that I think have helped me along the way.
Fabulous. That's fabulous. You not only express the importance of intergenerational relationships in the workforce, but how valuable they are in life.
Yes.
I've seen that in my own life as well. And it really does kind of take us home, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Yes. I know the adage is probably overused, but with age comes wisdom. I mean, truly. And if I could still ask my grandfather questions, I would. I always seem to know what to do, but there's a reason for that. He had experience.
Exactly. Great information you've shared, and valuable information. We're going to open it up now for questions. I'm sure there's a few questions here. So please unmute yourself if you have a question for Jen. Give her a chance to get a drink of water. Karen?
Thank you,
Karen,
Christine.
thank you.
And thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. Very impactful and meaningful and touching, and we appreciate it. I wanted to just share something about experience that's not a pleasant topic per se, but it's something to keep in mind. Just today in the radio, I was listening to the gentleman who's the head of Boeing Corporation, and he was having to testify before Congress as to why their safety record is as poor as it has been for years, and even more so recently. And he just flat out said, we lost a lot of experienced workers during COVID, and we've had to hire a lot of less experienced folks. And, that was kind of was quite a wake-up call, because experience can be a matter of life and death. And we don't think about that, sometimes. And, so there's so many aspects of having an experienced workforce, which I know you're very supportive of. And so I guess my question would be, it is a difficult transition companies are facing with people leaving or wanting to mentor or take less responsible opportunities or whatever they want to do. I don't know that we see the commitment on the training side, the upskilling of the newer folks. And yes, there's partnership programs, et cetera. But it takes time to develop that level, that deep knowledge that you've spoken about. So just wanted to hear your thoughts about how companies can ramp that up a little bit quicker for all of us.
Yes, I think you are spot on, Karen. And I probably heard the same or similar news update this morning. And I agree. It was jarring to really think about how real that was for certain families who experienced their own family members on either one of the flights that occurred several years ago, the crashes anyway from those flights. And to your very point, there are companies, and I probably shared this example at the Wisdom Conference last year, like BMW and others, that have invested heavily, and I mean in the millions and tens of millions, in the kind of training and upskilling necessary for their workforce. Because frankly, what you see are as the aging workforce and the experienced workforce, and some of those skills are really growing out of the workforce and out of organizations. And those same skills are not being pursued, even if available teachings are there. They're either not being pursued, or the available training and teaching is just lacking. And I think it's a couple of things from a local education system and statewide legislation and education systems have personally, I believe, and have a responsibility to make sure that upskilling and training is happening, that journeyman opportunities in trade schools are accessible to students, and that those job opportunities are accessible, and that wages for those job opportunities are not just livable wages, but are something that they can support their family with. So there's a lot of legislation that I think needs to be addressed on that end. And then for corporate and for companies, I think there's an opportunity and a responsibility, to your very point, to ensure that there are either programs in place to retain workers and knowledge, and have knowledge transfer of those workers occur, and transition plans in place. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the focus starts to shift to production and speed and the dollar, and not necessarily the quality and the safety that you're speaking of. And that's why you do see sort of the oversight organizations, whatever those may be. There are many of them, even beyond things like OSHA and others. The oversight organizations do tend to come in and do their audits. And so then you do have leaders and teams who spend time sort of proving what they're doing right, and how they mitigate against what they're doing wrong. And so that time, those resources, the dollars, I think can be redirected into training programs, though expensive. So the company I've joined here, they recently, before I even joined, made a significant change in their training. What was once a 3 to 4 week program for new hires coming in, there are 2 specific areas where licensure is required. The training was once 3 to 4 weeks, and we've just shifted to be 6 months. And it was a significant investment. And also it was a very smart long-term business decision, because we needed to ensure that the knowledge and experience was in place. And even those coming in with experience are going through that same kind of training, because it does help us from a compliance standpoint long-term. But I recognize that, not every company is making the investment today for what's needed longer term, for sure. But I think it's education and legislation sort of at the local level and statewide level, which of course, there's wide variances there. It's livable wages and training, and not just livable wages, but wages that can support a family. And that's through legislation, which is starting to occur. And then it's the responsibility of companies. And I think for public companies, the shareholders, certainly need to speak up there.
Great
Thank you.
insight. Mhm. And Sandy, thanks for sharing your knowledge. My every day is always a new day.
I love that.
Thank you, Sandy. Rosemary, do you have a question? Unmute yourself, Rosemary.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know I have a question. I always have a question. And sometimes the questions are uncomfortable questions. Particularly, I wanted to, I have so many questions, but I really don't want to take up other people's time if somebody else has a question, but I don't see hands up. So I will go ahead till you shut me off.
Go ahead.
Okay. Your last comment, Jen, about the training and upskilling and the attempt to, on the part of some employers, to retain the knowledge and experience of older workers, reminds me that over the last 40 years, I'll just speak from a personal point of view, I have watched in our economy, employers go from taking, and I think this business about Boeing is very pertinent, going from taking pride in doing jobs well to making profits fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I would defy anybody to dispute that. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
It is.
And I think employers have a problem, and I think to a great extent they brought it upon themselves. So having said that, there seems to be a focus with everyone these days, and I see it even in communications with people, about let's do it fast and technology and speeding up, all of which saves money, is very frustrating because there's no time for reflection. There's no time to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're going to see more problems like Boeing has, because we discourage people from taking the time to do it right. And I was reminded of an old-fashioned phrase, particularly in the construction industry, when my son was building houses out on Nantucket. He learned that to do the job right and well, you measure twice and you cut once. That is a mentality that seems to have vanished from the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
All it is let's get it done fast. Doesn't matter whether it's right or not. So I don't know. I think it's going to take a long time to move out of that kind of mentality. Would you want to comment on that?
Yes, and I would the measure twice, cut once. My grandfather always used an expression like that.
I am
It's very
sure,
true.
because he
Very
came
true.
from a generation that was trained well
Yes.
and
So
took pride in their work.
that's right. I think what I would offer, and in my perspective, appreciating the that perspective of the craftsmanship and the taking pride in one's work, and seeking to ensure that we're moving in the right direction and everyone is on the right page and that we're doing the right things. While I keep that in my background personally, what has served me well in the workplace of go fast, directionally correct is good enough, or 80-20, whatever those phrases might be. What has served me well, and with my current team that I've taken on, is I actually have a little sign here as a reminder to myself: you don't have to be perfect to be amazing, but you do have to seek and ask the questions and seek the guidance and seek the feedback and the knowledge along the way. And so as you, especially if you're in a position where you're learning something new, and that's that whole concept, that idea of how do we pass the knowledge down from generation to generation. Well, it's only going to happen if people have the sort of psychological safety, the mindset of understanding that they're not going to be perfect the first time, but when they make mistakes, that builds character, and be willing to ask for the feedback and the guidance and the course correction, and work through it. And where do I have time, to fumble and make mistakes? I allow that when I assign work and projects, versus where do we have a deliverable and we need to get something done. I will rely on a more experienced individual and bring people along. And in recent years, follow a lot of advice of experiences I've been a part of where I might circle back. And so if you kind of were strung along and you didn't really know what was happening, I still need to make sure we circle back with you, because next time I need you to be ready, and I need you to have certain knowledge to work with. So trying to, I guess, find in that continuum of go fast and be bold and blazon, and we might make mistakes along the way, and certainly, I think when we see the mistakes of the level of Boeing, it's significant enough we should be wanting to pause. But then on the other end, of seeking to get things right, how do I find a way in the middle? And I try to view that through then the generational differences, the diversity differences of a team coming together to work together, sort of creates that continuum place in the middle. That's just thoughts that I would offer in terms of how I seek to lead and bring people along and make sure that someone less experienced, not always younger, but just less experienced on a topic, are learning along the way. Because I'm only as successful as the least successful person on my team, not the most successful one.
You also used a phrase which I hadn't really understood, I don't think: associate resource groups.
Mm-hmm.
Would you clarify that a little bit? Is that with relationship to your current employer and what they are trying to accomplish in this area?
Yes. So, and thank you for asking about that, because that sometimes can be a little obscure. I talked about avoiding that on resumes. So some companies might call them employee resource groups. We referenced associate resource groups, but nonetheless, many different companies, especially larger corporations, do sort of create the framework and allow for these groups to somewhat naturally form. There are charters that are typically in place. There's usually a leadership body, such as a diversity council, or sometimes HR and executive sponsorship, that will guide these groups and also help them to accomplish their goals. But you might see different resource groups that are associated with different aspects and dimensions of diversity. And that wouldn't just be the factors that we can often observe and see with our own eyes, such as skin color or age, race, et cetera. That might also be with other dimensions of diversity that we may hold internal. So kind of our thinking or our beliefs and our belief system. So yes, there are a number of companies that, yeah, thank you, Karen. Affinity groups is also referenced in other companies, but companies that you're probably familiar with, such as Google or Verizon or Coca-Cola, GE, a lot of larger organizations leverage these groups. So as part of their diversity council or even their charter and their strategy around diversity. And so age-based groups also exist within organizations.
So are these groups within the employee group, employer organizations? Is that what they are?
That's
Okay.
right.
So as you probably know, and you've talked about the difficulty of people finding employment. One of the reasons we started Encore, Palm Beach County, be 8 years ago, is we observed that a lot of people were having problems getting noticed on the websites like Google and Monster and so forth. And we all know that there are the algorithms that discriminate against people over 50 and so forth and so on. Rather than deal with that frustration, we decided to look at what employers here in Palm Beach County, since most people didn't want to move to another state, they want to find employment where they live. And Palm Beach County has a lot of, they have large companies like Office Depot, but they have small to medium-sized companies, many of which don't advertise on Google or Monster because of the cost of doing so. We decided to focus our efforts on identifying those employers here in Palm Beach County that welcome mature workers, value their wisdom and experience. And so we've tried to do that through events like this, through our Wisdom and Experience Awards event, and particularly by carrying job boards for those kinds of employers, age-friendly employers on our website. Do you have any suggestion about what more we could do to bring the parties together, the people looking for work and the employers looking for them?
Sure. I'm sure I could give it some thought. I mean, when you think about sort of addressing a problem like that, and how does a small but mighty team try to make inroads with any X number of employers and get the messaging out there, and develop the relationships, that could be a significant task. But one that I certainly would be interested in and willing to partner on. A few rough ideas off the top of my head do occur in terms of a communication campaign. But beyond that, I think, specifically then targeting the chambers, the economic development boards, the entities, the public entities that exist within Palm Beach County across our different cities and municipalities also come to mind. I just sat in on a business development board meeting last week where we spent an hour and a half, business leaders and the academics, the university presidents and business colleges. We were trying to identify the skills that where we find are lacking or that are a gap, and feeding this information to our local universities to inform them on their future programs that they will have in place. And that was just one opportunity. And I could see the opposite end of that would be, how do we find the employers that perhaps have programs that we just need to link up to other entities such as Encore, and develop those inroads, those relationships. I mean, from that meeting, I had 3 more meetings. So again, the networking. So those are just rough ideas. I just noticed the time, and Christine, I probably should have told you I was going to need to run right at around 1 o'clock. But either way, I would love to continue that dialogue and conversation, just because I have gotten more involved here locally in Palm Beach County, and also it's a big personal pursuit of mine.
You can count on hearing from us, Jen.
Perfect.
Okay, Jen, I know you wanted to leave us with a couple of tidbits before you go.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the few things that it's with any audience, and really, you've got to be willing to, what's the upside, what's the positive, what can I learn from this, and that's hard to do sometimes when you feel like you've been sort of on the low end of the totem pole or the stick or the bad news for a long time. So keep a journal or write it down, and remind yourself. It's kind of like that whole idea of gratitude journal, but keep the positive in mind. Be willing to take the opportunities, even if you're not quite sure, or even if it isn't the big role or the big job. If there's something else, you never know what door it may open up. And then, if you're not already, I would encourage you to give back to your local community through some form of community giving, nonprofit space specifically. And again, don't forget to use that as an opportunity for the networking. What is your name? What do you do? Who do you know? Who else do you work with? It's pretty easy. And it works for me.
You've shared a lot of great information. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to being in touch. Everyone's saying thank you. So words of wisdom. Yes, Susan. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Jen. Much good luck in the new position.
Thank you. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.